right, we're live.
All right, so if we're live, then someone has to go out and do a stream test, right?
Yeah, let's do a stream test before we go official live.
Internet's not letting me.
Can Brianna see us? Real question is how many people will notice the Snoopy to my left? That's really the question.
That's really what it comes down to.
The internet's not working. The house just building one. It's saying it is, but she can't open. I can't get it to open.
Is it down again?
It's saying it's there, you know. I can use my data because it's actually working right now, which usually it doesn't in school.
Patrick, are you able to see it?
That's Facebook.
Wait, but that's what we said 5 minutes ago.
Facebook looks good because it does all three heads like in a rectangle, like same size. Where the other ones was like me with huge and then you too little on Instagram. Because I had Tim watching on Instagram and I started, he's like, you take up the screen and I could see Bill's ear in James's chair.
Are people still calling Bill's phone for questions?
Yes.
Okay. So you got the banner up.
Okay, I see us on the CIO forum, which is good.
Mm-hmm.
And we're 2 minutes away from launch, everybody. Shannon, we got you live still here, right?
Yes, sir.
All right.
I love your tie, Bill.
You know, I'm so glad you said that because I was getting a lot of crap about it before hopping in here. They said something like, this is the second week in a row you wore this tie. And I'm like, this is no way.
We should be, yeah.
Because usually it does a little circle on top of it. So we search it. Like yesterday, it had a circle around this, and it was saying like live underneath, and you just tapped it.
Okay.
All right, are we ready to go, everybody?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Well, I want to welcome everybody. We've got James here and Shannon. I'll do a little introduction. This is the Red Zones Innovation Forum. And this is our leadership week 3. We're going to be talking about defense innovation and cloud app security. And I've got James here, who is our security expert, CTO, COO at Red Zone. And Shannon is in charge of product development with cloud app security and risk meters with SonicWall. So welcome, both of you.
Hello, hello.
Thanks, Bill. Happy to be here.
So Shannon, you're down in Texas. How is Texas these days? I heard you're open up, ready for business.
Yeah, we did officially open up some things today. Many of us are staying home still. But yeah, we'll see how this goes. But it's a little early, it feels like. But you know, what can you do?
Yeah, well, this is going to be interesting how the whole country rolls out. But typical Texas, charging into things, which I love.
Yes. Yes. They've already started talking about opening community pools and when that's going to happen. And that's just worrisome.
Absolutely. Well, we'll have a lot to learn from this event moving forward. There'll be a lot of post-game analytics and how we handle this. We'll learn a lot for sure. Welcome, Mike. Thank you for joining us. So James, I want you both to introduce yourselves so that all the listeners have a chance to understand who you are.
Sure. So I'm James Grafasi. I'm the CTO, COO here. We've been around for about 20 years together now. I guess this is only our second time on the video side, so it'll be an adventure for sure. I focus mostly on the security piece and, of course, talking with all of our clients about security and what needs to happen next for them.
Fantastic. Yes, James and I have been collaborating for close to 20 years on advanced security topics. And so it's great to have you on the show again, week 3, but week 2 with you. Shannon, what about yourself? You and I came on the podcast almost a year ago.
Yeah.
So
Almost a year ago. So yeah, I
tell us
do
about yourself.
product management for SonicWall's Cloud App Security. I formerly also handled risk meters, but I'm still familiar with that project. So I've been in cybersecurity, for 17 plus years now. Between product management and support and, being a network admin. I've been around a while. So right now we focus on kind of the cloud side, the SaaS protection side for my product. So it's, super exciting. And you guys are nice enough to invite me back from last summer's conversation. So, I'm excited for today.
That's great. We are too. And so this leadership challenge is really important because I've been getting people to think about what's their next 100 days look like when work opens. And part of that's offense, and it's aligning security and a key CIO and digital decision makers for how are they going to help their business make money. And then there's the piece about security where we have to figure out how do we make security more agile and portable so that we can play offense, because businesses are going to want to add revenue, take care of customers. So now we have this distributed workforce, and how do we handle that moving forward? How do people handle the next 100 days from a security point of view, in your opinion, Shan?
So I think the next 100 days is going to be critical, right? So over the last 2 months, we saw a tremendous amount of people make a sharp right turn right into securing their remote workforces with, VPN spike licenses or whatever they needed to do, secure remote access. And now that we have a very, very remote yet not entirely mobile workforce, people are trying to get back to regular business, right? And be as productive as they can. So you have a multitude of folks who took their security priorities and had to shift them. And now we've got to kind of shift them back a little bit to the mainstream. So where we super focused on remote access, now we need to start looking at the other ways our employees can access our information, right? So for cloud security, Office 365 is predominant. Most cases, your users can now access it from anywhere, whether they're VPN'd in or not. So how are you protecting that data? And staying on top of threats, because they're not decreasing with COVID-19.
So what do you think, James, for the next 100 days? I mean, we're seeing this very tactical increase. It's funny, I run these groups as always strategy focused, but in times of real intensity, human beings get narrow and they get very tactical and practical and less thinking about the future, because we're trying to figure out short term. Initially it was, how do I get people remote access? But now we got to start looking at how we secure our cloud. Many of us were dipping our toes in the water with cloud. Now we're there at scale. So what do you think, James?
I mean, we're seeing kind of two interesting things happen. One that we're seeing is the folks who are using G Suite that didn't necessarily care much about security before are now asking, what else can I do? And so previously they weren't necessarily too worried about cloud app security, things like that. But now that they're really out there, people aren't coming into the office. There's more and more concern about viruses and malware. So we're starting to see the G Suite people join the Microsoft people in terms of caring about security. So that's been interesting for us. The other piece that we're seeing is we've heard a lot about people adopting the cloud. And then the requests that we're getting are folks that see they thought they were adopting the cloud, and now they're really adopting the cloud. And so they're escalating from they're using it a little bit to everyone's using OneDrive every day completely. And there's a lot more fear now in terms of, well, how am I securing that? What's coming in there? We have a lot for the next, especially for the next 100 days of, how many devices are they using, and are they actually the business devices? And I can say from talking to a lot of clients, they're no longer really using the business devices. They're on their bigger home machines, or they're sitting on their couch with a tablet, and they've really disseminated what endpoint devices they're looking at. So that need for security, they can't just rely on, oh, it's on my business computer, so I'm safe because I have my next gen AV on my PC and I'm good to go. So we're starting to see that swing of the antivirus component and the 0-day protection component of CAS really building up.
What do you think? By the way, Shola, thank you for that comment. That's a wonderful comment about what Gartner's saying about digital dexterity and having this is really important, being able to be fluid with our endpoints. This hasn't been the case because we've got the stacking effect of all these technologies at the endpoint. And I'd love for you, Shannon, to talk about what is CAS, Cloud App Security, and as you define it for people.
Sure. So SonicWall's Cloud App Security product actually brings together the advanced threat protection for email. So your Office 365 email, your Gmail, right? So the machine learning and the AI for next-gen phishing, as well as for your OneDrives, your Google Drives, your files stored within the SaaS apps themselves. So we do that with a single solution. We really focus on the advanced threat layer. So with all of your SaaS application subscriptions, you get a base level of security that comes with those. Those are not designed to pick up the threats that came in this morning, right, that nobody knows about, or threats that come in tonight that people don't know about. So we have a solution that layers on top of that to catch everything that your cloud service providers don't know about, and make sure that your users are protected regardless from whatever device they're logged in from, because we protect from within. So if somebody's checking email on their phone, their email's still scanned in the cloud. Same is true with OneDrive or Google Drive, right? If they're accessing it from their home device.
So this is this flexibility that I love, and because I think people think about their assets, their corporate assets, but so we can control that endpoint, and we can put advanced AV, next gen AV, but then all of a sudden we're using phones and we're using personal devices, our kids' devices, where now that endpoint is gone exponential. So James, what are your thoughts about that?
I mean, it's really hard to keep track of all the different things people are doing now. One of the things that we see is as all the kids went home, there's this proliferation of even more devices that are uncontrolled. And we actually noticed that people are a little bit more worried about all the other cloud apps that they're using, such as Salesforce, such as the G Suite and Dropbox. And so to Shannon's previous point, the fact that with Cloud App Security, we can reach out and touch multiple vendors, that's becoming a request that we're getting a lot more often. So not only are the devices out there and spreading and uncontrolled, but the desire to actually reach out and touch all of those different SaaS apps and cloud apps and get some level of security on them as well is something that we find is growing, and the need is growing also. I've yet to find a parent who has not somehow loaded Google Classroom on their PC to go keep track of their kids while they're learning from home. Well, now we have a whole new G Suite on PCs that never had it before, and they're sharing documents and using it. And that's really one of our concerns. And what we also have to be careful of is what is coming back through that pathway. So, for example, we've seen a couple of situations where people are helping their kids and they're sharing a document through Google Docs, but that's on their work computer. And so that's in my documents, which is now getting replicated via OneDrive or SharePoint. And now it's coming inside the data center, whether it's physical or colo or virtual. And now it's able to be touched inside. And so if there's not a good level of security, both inside, outside, at the API and at the endpoint level, what we're seeing is the ability for systems to kind of end around traditional security is going up. And so we find that that's a building complexity that people really have to worry about.
Yeah, and that's an excellent point. And, you know, as security professionals, right, we all talk about layered security. But now I think people that are using the technology are really seeing the need for the additional layers. I talked to a school district recently whose primary use case that they were trying to address was infections within their students' Google Drives. Because what was happening, to James's point, right, is the infection source is in Google Drive, and then the drive syncs to the endpoint catches the detection, and then the next time Google Drive syncs again, that same file comes down. So it becomes a vicious circle because the source of the infection is within Google Drive. And as you've got more devices, more personal devices, I am definitely one of those parents whose personal laptop got taken over by Google Classroom recently. So, you know, as you have more devices, it's ever more important that you're protecting all of the layers, not just single layers.
Yeah, and just let everybody know that's listening in, there's a number that is streaming on the bottom. We do definitely encourage call-ins at any point. My team is looking forward to fielding questions, and they'll present it to me, and we'll let Shannon and James dive in. But I do love this idea of biologically, we've had a 0 day. I mean, we've literally had a 0 day with this pandemic. When the plague hit, we had no way to mitigate this other than just guessing what we needed to do. And it's interesting, a lot of our biological ways of handling or talking about infections and disease and things of that nature now are in the digital framework. So how do you get to a point where you can create a digital immune system, a corporate immune system, something in which these, we have the helper technologies, I'm calling it CAS, I'm calling it endpoint protection, that would be best suit a business, a medium, small, large, to create more automation and threat detection in 0 days. You want to take a stab at that, James?
Sure. I mean, one of the things that we want to look at is, well, let's just take the example of business email compromise attacks. They can happen in a large number of ways. The reason I liken that to the human immune system is your human body has lots of sensors everywhere. You know, your brain gets to play with your hearing, your eyes, your smell, your taste. And when we're talking about an account compromise, to me, we need that same impact. And so if we relate that to cloud app security, that's the ability to look at that attack protection, but reach out and say, okay, what's happening in Gmail at the same time as what's happening in Microsoft at the same time as what's happening in Salesforce. Mm-hmm. And what we do there is really broaden our sensor layer so that we can detect something bad sooner rather than later. You know, if we're down to one sense in terms of if all we have is sight, then we never hear the bus coming from behind us, right? And so we want to make sure that from a security aspect, we get that same censoring in terms of not just the antivirus and the APIs attaching to scan the files, but also to get the who's trying to come in. Why is my Salesforce being hit from Uzbekistan, but my email's being hit from Maryland, and then Gmail's being hit from California? All of those should be pulled together. And so to me, that's one of the things that helps us react to that in that human immune system way, is to be able to say, okay, based on what I can see, hear, and smell, here's what we need to do, and here's an account that we need to turn off because they might just be in Gmail right now, but if they're in there, they're probably going to get into the next one. So let's turn that off sooner rather than later. So kind of a preemptive and proactive attacks and blocking is how I would phrase that.
Thanks, James. Shannon, what do you think?
No, I think James is spot on. One of the things too that's important, and James hit the nail on the head, right, is you have, in many cases, you have people using different SaaS apps now, right? So if you're an administrator, how are you managing those? Typically, you're managing them independently. So you have a singular view as to what's going on into each environment. One of the things that Cloud App Security does is it brings all of those together. So we can actually correlate all of your login activities across your SaaS apps that you're protecting and give you that view as well as a consolidated threat view, which is great. And I, having come from a central management background many years, it's critical for administrators to have a view across the plane instead of just a single siloed view. So they get that big picture, and we can do that correlation for them. One of the things that's great about the SonicWall products is most of our products share our capture security appliance and RTDMI protection, right? So our sandboxing technology. So if a new threat is picked up on the firewall side or the internal network side, that information is shared with the other products so that they are also aware and in tune that this is a new threat, and they've got the protection they need for those.
Love that. I love that. I think we have a call in. Michael, how are you doing?
I'm doing wonderful. How are you?
Very good. Well, we are glad you were able to call in. Saw your comments on YouTube, I think.
Yeah.
What's your question, Mike?
So we're a new Capture client customer we're rolling out right now. And we are actually evaluating the cloud app security stuff as well. And one of the things that I'm kind of curious about is we have a lot of customers that have to get data to us, okay? And so they will do all sorts of security evaluations of our environment. Where do we store the data? Is it encrypted at rest? Is it encrypted in transit?
Sure.
Yet when it comes time to actually send the data to us, they attach it to an email and send us an email, right? So it would be very nice to know if the cloud app security could have some sort of rules that we could put in place saying, if we receive emails from this client with attachments, can it let us know so that we can tell them, okay, we need that to be put in to share file instead of emailed to us, insecurely. Is that something that CAS can do?
I don't believe so. Now, because CAS is a layered technology, and James, you can chime in, whenever you're comfortable, but because CAS is a layered technology, we focus on the advanced threat layer. So when your email is coming in, it's actually coming in directly to Microsoft and coming in directly to Exchange Online. So there's a portion of base level functionality that's performed at the Microsoft layer, and the actual routing of where emails should go, I suspect, is going to be handled at the Exchange Online layer.
Yeah, and I would say the other piece we could look at, Mike, is the DLP portions of it and kind of getting into the compliance side of the system is where we could also look at additional rule basing. Not so much on the security side of it, but just on the DLP side. Your example also kind of brings up another example, which is, let's say, and I think this is becoming more popular as we get into the fully disseminated world of everybody working from home. Typically we'll run into a situation similar to yours where that file coming in also has a malware, right, or a 0-day. And so one of the things that we think is cool is if you're putting that to, let's say, a SharePoint document drop or a OneDrive document drop, what's useful about that is the API, in addition to being able to reach out, touch that file, and apply some DLP conditions, can also scan it. So if they're giving you a malware and it's hitting that SharePoint, OneDrive, something along those lines, or Dropbox, what have you, and at the same time, the person who needs to review that file is trying to go on the rush and they're on a tablet and they don't have any of your normal antivirus or endpoint DLP or anything that would be on a normal box. At least on the CAS side, you could reach out and touch that and A, make sure it's safe, and B, apply some of the compliance rules and DLP rules onto it, even though you don't control the endpoint on either side of that picture. So I think that's also where it can be useful in a situation such as yours. In terms of the exact trigger of the SMTP rule, there's probably about 6 different ways to do that between how CAS works with 365 and what 365 itself will do. So the desire of what you want absolutely can be done. But this would just be another way to enhance that, because Shola also had commented in the stream about DLP. And I think that is a underused facility within CAS, which is the fact that you can start implementing bits of DLP across multiple third-party systems that don't want to talk on systems that you have absolutely no control over. And that's something that traditionally we could never actually say any of those words together in a sentence and have it work, but now we can.
Fantastic.
I gotcha. That makes sense. That makes sense. I like the idea that it is possible, maybe not exactly how I had originally thought, but tying in the DLP piece to it, it definitely makes sense.
Cool.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks for the call in.
No problem. Thank you.
Those of you that can see James's Snoopy off his left shoulder will get a free 27-point guide to endpoint security. Last week, you just have to text in the corner or YouTube, Facebook, Instagram that, yes, I see James Snoopy. That's great. Shola, if you get a chance, that would be great to have you call in. Love to riff with you on your organization's approach to security and some of the questions you have a cloud app, knowing a little bit about your environment. Okay, so let's talk about APIs and security. I think that's an important concept to talk about a little bit. Shannon, I'm gonna let you jump in how do you explain to security buyers, CIOs, and security lieutenants the importance of APIs and the difference?
So it is very important, particularly in a SaaS world. A lot of times folks hear APIs and they think that they have to manually configure, API connectors for various systems. So we take care of all of that for you in our onboarding process. The key significance is in using the APIs within the SaaS environment, because we're cloud native, it gives us a lot more flexibility in the ways that we can protect data and the different data that we can protect than traditional, say, gateway-based solutions. We can protect from within the inside. So when we have access to all the management events, say in Office 365 or G Suite, people logging in, what kind of data are they downloading? We have the ability to correlate all that information to give you things like account takeover protection and visibility. In addition to not protecting just email, but also spanning that protection to the Google Drives and the OneDrives and the SharePoints, versus using multiple solutions to protect different pieces. So we get a lot of flexibility with the APIs. The onboarding for getting up and protected and doing your initial scan, I can have somebody up and running in about 4 minutes. So, if you want to read every line item in the user agreements, probably take a little bit longer. But the beauty of APIs, it's seamless for your users. There's no portal that they have to log into. There's no agent that gets installed on a device. You don't have to deploy a broker or a VM. It's a super easy onboarding process. It gives us a lot of flexibility in, spanning those protections and those advanced services using one single product and one single type of, sandboxing across that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Shannon. One of our big missions is to secure the lives of a billion people, and this is a really interesting time we're at, because I think this API layer gives us the ability to interact with a lot of complexity and manage it and tighten it so that we can confidently deploy our assets into the cloud with having this. I call it a shim. James has a better way of explaining this. I think it's worth hearing his differentiation, because some of you might be like, what the heck is a shim? So James, this is your chance to jump in and explain.
Sure. So yeah, Bill likes to refer to it as shim. And of course, I'm the opposite. I refer to CAS as shimless, mostly because, if we take things like Mimecast, Proofpoint, or one of the traditionals, they're a gateway, as Shannon referred to before. And a gateway means that the data actually has to flow through it. I like to liken the API to more of a old-fashioned intrusion detection tap, where it's just tapping in at the side, so you're not messing with the routing and you're not messing with the flow. That's also really nice from an implementation because it means we don't have to change DNS records. We're not yanking around gateways. So it can be really, really convenient from that aspect. The ability to turn it on becomes effortless from an end user impact standpoint. And a lot of other tools, whether it be on the endpoint side or on the gateway side, they're not seamless in that same way. You have cutovers and planning that has to happen, and rolling forward and rolling back potentially when DNS messes up. So it's a lot of freedom from that aspect. And I would say the other kind of cool thing about API is a lot of times people talk to us and say, hey, well, I want a SIEM system. I'll say, okay, great. Why? They say, well, I want to know if someone's trying to get into Salesforce and 365 all at the same time. I'm like, great, you don't want a SIEM system. You want cloud app security, because that's actually what it does. So
I love to hear that, James.
and it's simpler and it's easier. So it's a good way to go for that. And I think it's a underutilized kind of concept there. And so what I would like to see, especially as people are editing and changing their security, is really that growth to say, okay, I don't want a SIEM, I want what the SIEM does. And so what product does what a SIEM does better and faster? And here you go, there it is.
Well, thank you, James, for that. So we have a call in. I'm listening to James and getting a call in here. I think this is from Keith.
Yeah, this is Keith.
Keith, how are you?
I'm great. It's a great, beautiful day in Philadelphia today.
Well, what is your question today, Keith?
My question is, well, within the next 100 days and whatnot, I'm going to continue to focus on my staff and team. So I wanted to know, what are your recommended methods to educate a staff to become more aware of the evolving threats and tricks that the hackers and scammers use to infiltrate networks?
Hold on for a second. I think we're having a little bit of a tough connection here. Can everybody see James? Okay, I think we're live again. Okay. I want to repeat the question for everybody. If
You got it.
Oh, so hey, Keith, would you repeat the question, please?
Yes, I would ask, what are your recommended methods to educate a staff to become more aware of the evolving threats and tricks that the hackers and scammers use to infiltrate networks?
So there's a couple of overly easy answers, right? So there's US Cert and signing up for that, dark reading and signing up for that. Those are really good sources, right? But they're a little dry. They're a little old. There's one that we like called Data Breach Today. That one's got a pretty good record in terms of tips and tricks. But probably the best thing I can think of is hooking up with a partner who's paying attention to those things. So, for example, we try to pay attention to a lot of those, and it's more than even we can grab everything out there and come back and teach you about. So what we find is focus on the things that can actually impact your solutions and what you have versus focusing on everything else. And what I mean by that is if you drink from the fire hose of every single CERT organization that wants to tell you the latest sky is falling problem, it's just way too much. And so if you have something within your industry, I always think that that's a really good sign. And then the other thing I would tell you is also follow the banking industry. Pretty often we find whatever happens to banks happens to everybody else 2 to 3 months later. So if you follow the banks, you're kind of ahead of the curve in terms of what's happening now or what potential issues that you might have. And kind of the last way I would answer that is we like to take an environment and tear it apart from the aspect of what could happen. And if you plan for what could happen and protect against that, you don't really care about all of these new styles because you've already started protecting about what could happen as opposed to reactively trying to play whack-a-mole with what might be happening in the future. And so we coach people to do it that way of what could happen and add protections for it kind of before you need it. And we have fun because what we find is most of the time when people send us a link from US Cert or something like that, and they say, oh my God, this is brand new. And we get to say, it's fine. You're already protected because your design is right and how you're protecting it is right. And let's face it, there's a huge portion of all of those updates that they send that really, if you just do normal patching, you would have already fixed, good 70, 80% of them by staying ahead of patching and doing it on time versus only patching when something breaks. So that would be how we recommend people kind of go forward with that.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Keith. Okay. All right. So just as we keep going here, I wanted to, Shannon, can you hear me okay?
I can.
So what is the biggest, as you've been rolling out SaaS, not SaaS solutions, but CAS solutions here for SonicWall and talking to and customers, what has been the primary question people have from the conversations that you've been having with people?
I would say that's a tough one. I get a lot of varied questions, right? Because depending on where someone is in their cloud journey, to James's point earlier, a lot of people thought they were in the cloud and now they're really in the cloud. I get a lot of questions on how does this API stuff work, right? A lot of folks don't understand it. And I also get a lot of questions around business email compromise. And how we can protect against that, right? What's different about an API-based solution versus a gateway solution? So those would kind of be my primaries.
You have to respond to
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think those primaries are what we would agree with as well. One of the other top questions that we get is, Microsoft has CAS. Isn't that the same thing? And it's one of those unfortunate things where two products, the same initials, they have nothing to do with each other. But I think we get that question endlessly. And so really we have to kind of re-explain to people the fact that, cloud app security from a SonicWall point of view is multi-vendor. It's a mix of the API. It's a mix of the attack protection as well as the antivirus. And so for us, that's a real differentiator. The other thing that we find is most people who do have it on the 365 side, it's very difficult to configure and to actually use and to make some kind of valuable product out of it. And so we kind of like pulling people back from that E3 range and E5 range of Microsoft and using CAS and pulling it back to E3 plus Microsoft's cloud app security. It ends up being a much better mix is what we find. And so that's probably the most common question we get is that question of how is it different? Shannon, on your side, how would you answer the whole Microsoft versus SonicWall? How is it different?
I get that. I do get asked that question quite frequently. I would say that I really, really agree with you. One of the things that I hear, I grew up in the Microsoft world, in the Microsoft era, strong Microsoft advocate. I also feel like some of their implementations are very, very complex for a lot of organizations. So when you start looking at something like all the pieces within Microsoft that you have to leverage to be able to fully utilize cloud app security for Microsoft, it becomes very daunting and it becomes very challenging for administrators. You brought a fabulous point on everybody's using the same acronym, right? And we're providing different services. So it's not an apples to apples comparison, and you're right. There are benefits, I feel, from our product over Microsoft's, particularly the ease of use, in the multi-vendor aspect of it and getting that combined protection in one thing instead of maybe potentially 8 different services or, integrating conditional rights management and everything else. So they're not apples to apples comparison, but we definitely, I think, excel in the ease of use and the ease of multi-vendor protection.
Yeah, I think one other thing to bring up, since we were talking about APIs, that I really think is cool is it does allow for a multiple layer approach without having the same type of solution, do the same type of scanning on the same type of files. For example, I've got clients who are worried about what's coming in their Dropbox or Google Drive. And so they sit there and they're, all right, I have antivirus, I have malware bytes, I have all the stuff on my laptop to try to protect that. And so what I like about something like CAS is it can reach out through the API, grab that Google Doc, grab that OneDrive, give it a level of scanning that's different than what's on your machine. And you're not ending up with basically the same style of scanning, destroying the performance of your machine, but you're still getting defense in layers. So we like that a lot. And then one question that we've gotten periodically is, if I have kind of the rest of the SonicWall suite, how does that help or hurt? And so we had a really interesting example for them, which is they had people who were traveling overseas. And because they had, actually we can say both cases, because they had Capture Client, because they have CAS, what's interesting is if they did get a malware and then saved it to OneDrive or Google or wherever, or CAS, because it does use that similar Capture ATP sandboxing, what's cool is once it saw that overseas, everybody in the corporation had that same level of protection, even though it hadn't hit America yet. And so you get a huge, to me, you get just a huge escalation of speed to protection. And so if you do have a big roaming workforce, and I consider everybody working from home right now a big roaming workforce, your ability to say, oh, okay, I got hit by this one person out there, that inoculation is now everywhere, and it's across every product set. And so I find that to be really helpful as well, because if we're doing things such as web application firewalling, I get to have those same fingerprints come down and say, okay, what affected this Google person, I'm going to keep out of my web farm that I'm servicing, because I don't want to be seen as a toxic presence on the web serving malware out. And so even something as simple as CAS can actually help when it's integrated properly with your production website or with the website that you used for sharing files with your customer. So it can kind of work in all different directions.
Well, I know we have a call in from Shola. Shola, can you hear me? Fantastic. Well, Shola, thank you for calling in. What do you have for Shannon and James today?
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Love your show, Bill, James. Nice to meet you, Shannon.
Nice to meet you.
My question is, what do you see as a future of IT security support? Because I think the future of business, when we come out of this pandemic, would probably be most people are going to be working remotely. And the security paradigm will have to change. Do you predict more businesses will begin to adopt the CISO as a service role?
I mean, from what I've seen, even if it's not a CISO as a service and there is a information security officer on site, what I'm seeing is people are going to adopt being able to piecemeal out subject matter expertise as a service. And so a lot of our clients, they have an information security officer, but fundamentally we are their security operations group, for lack of a better word. And I think that's going to become more and more popular as things come further and further away from the traditional data center, because you're going to want to have people who on a daily basis are doing triage of things like 365 and Salesforce. And not everyone's equipped for that, right? You can't really take people who are doing day-to-day PC firefighting and say, okay, now you need to be a 365 e-discovery expert. It doesn't quite work that way. And so what I see is kind of twofold of one, it's certainly not going to get any easier for IT departments. So I don't see the basic IT resources going away or changing that much in terms of user and system administration support. But I would see the security needs increasing versus decreasing. But I think the ability to have that be adopted as a outsourced service or partially outsourced service is probably what I would say is the most common path people are taking.
Thank you. Thank you for your answer, James.
Sure.
Thanks, everybody. Cheers.
Thank you, Shola. I would say also, Shannon, would be interested in your comment on this. We've been calling our programs co-managed ITC secured. One of the reasons I like it is because with SonicWall, I can deploy CAS, Capture, and these different technologies and have it into what I would call limited panes of view versus this proliferation of views. It's tightening that tooling. It's tightening the security tooling so that we can go in and actually deploy our security expertise to help people at scale. And that to me is really important, is that people learn, because there's a skills gap between these advanced tools and what people understand. And I'd love to see, how are you developing these products, Shannon, so that you can centralize the view a bit, people make sense of a lot of complexity?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And one of the things that we do with our Capture Security Center, to your point, is we're able to centrally manage our SonicWall products. One of the things that you will see continue to evolve over time is the data presentation will be more commingled and more customizable in what you want to see. So if you're using things like our firewall and our Capture, our Cloud App Security and our Capture Client, instead of seeing disparate views of the data, you can blend that information to get a holistic view across your threat landscape, or make it as singular as you want. So we give you that flexibility because everybody's needs are different. And James mentioned earlier, a lot of people ask for SIEMs, and he's like, well, let's talk about really what you need, right? And so you'll see our console and our dashboards as we evolve being more flexible and take more of a SOC dashboard look and feel, right? So that people can correlate information easier, make decisions easier, which enables them to do it faster. So we definitely look forward to that. I come from a strong central management background, and how, companies centrally manage products. My previous employer had, I think, probably 70 different products that integrated into a single console. And it was very difficult for admins to get a consolidated view. Okay, they could see what's going on with their endpoint, they could see what's going on with their encryption, they could see what's going on with their web gateway, but they had to run 3 or 4 different reports to get it. So it is hard, right, to bring all of that information together in some type of easily digestible form. But it is something we continue to strive for, and look forward to evolving throughout the year.
That's great. That's great. Any topics, any comments on that, James? We're going to move on to the next question.
Nope, roll.
We'll roll. Okay, sounds good. So one of the product sets that there's a lot of momentum around is endpoint security, and SonicWall has the Capture, and there's a proliferation of different vendors. We use that word a lot, proliferation, but there's a lot of endpoint approaches, from traditional AV to next gen AV. How do you educate people about what you do at the endpoint from this 0-day perspective versus what you're doing with CAS? How do you break that distinction for people?
I mean, my point of view would be you don't. And I think one of the things that we should look at is, previously whenever someone used the word endpoint, it meant PCs. And then a little bit later, it meant servers. And I think what's important is, as everything goes into the cloud and work from home, everything should just be considered an endpoint. So as an example, we had a client who had their development group hacked, right? And so their fear was, well, how do I know I'm not getting a virus from the development crew into my web servers that are sitting out there in the cloud? And we could answer that really easily by saying, well, we considered those endpoints, so we put Capture Client on it. And so if they were going to get that issue, it would have been sucked up into the sandbox. It would have been checked for everything up to and including Eternal Blue, and you're good to go. And the end answer was they really were perfectly good to go. And so I kind of think we need to throw away the distinction and that separation and say, okay, we're just trying to do different layers. Everything is an endpoint. So if I can put Capture Client on it or Next Gen AV on it, I want to do that. And then any other source location that we can stretch CAS to, that's what we want to do. So I kind of consider it, CAS controls the third parties and the uncontrollable, and Capture is your last defense for what you can control. And so I like to make it about whether you can or cannot control it versus is it an endpoint or is it not?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Shannon, what about yourself?
No, I love James's answer, and actually I was going to ask James a question here in a little bit because I know one of his stories that I'd like to get shared for sure. But yeah, I think it's very challenging, particularly given the use of the word endpoint, which is a great call out, right? Because we don't live in just an endpoint world anymore. We live in an iPad world. We live in an iPhone world. We live in an Android world. Everybody's accessing information from everywhere. And so, to James's point on what you can control versus what you can't control, that's absolutely right. And it's absolutely critical. One of the things that I think is key to staying on top of threats, and one of the questions we got earlier, right, was how do you keep your staff abreast of, what threats are coming every day? When you use products that have the technology built into them to catch, the things that you don't know about, your concern over what hits the news this morning becomes less, right? That stress becomes less. You focus less on the individual tactical threat and more on the fact that you have solutions in play that maybe they use machine learning, maybe they use AI, RTDMI to catch the stuff that your people don't know about. Right. And we hear a lot about machine learning and the way that James explains the benefits of machine learning is great. But, when I talk to people, they're like, well, how do you, do you protect against this attack that was announced this morning? Here's the thing. When you use things like machine learning and AI, you're very less tactical and you focus on the fact that you can protect the new stuff coming in versus the old stuff everybody knows about.
It's funny. We've been working to create businesses that are very agile and can recover quickly. And pretending that you have been infected, and then how can you recover and keep your business operations going? And it just popped in my head that the origin of this pandemic was one area of China, and it moved fast, and we couldn't handle it. Well, to the example that you gave earlier, when you start leveraging AI and machine learning, there's a reason these technologies are here. And if SonicWall picks up that threat on the other side of the world, we want to know about it, or the banks pick it up. Mm-hmm. They're going to know about it because you're going to have these sensors. You can't just tackle threat after threat after threat. You've got to have you got to have a wider net.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that. And endpoint, just for clarification here, an endpoint can be your machine, all types of work at home machines, Droid, iPhone, but it's also the web server in Azure and AWS. It's the backend app layer. It's the database layer. These are all endpoints, and they're just someone else's data center, and we forget that.
Yeah.
Well, and even a SaaS app now is an endpoint. 365 is technically an endpoint when you really think about it, because one of the calls we get a lot recently is ACH wire transfer fraud. Right now, we can easily perpetrate that fraud and never touch an endpoint because of cloud. Because we allow people to hit our cloud services with devices that we don't control, I can very easily do any of those attacks, and it will never trigger an endpoint. It will never trigger the SIEM that's pulling that data. It will never trigger any of that. Now, if we have, as Shannon said, the machine learning and the AI, and we're paying attention to it, which is another key element, you actually have to pay attention to it and watch it. If we're doing those things, then we can catch that, even though it swoops the surface and never really comes into our environment. And the attack protection is really how you can do that, because that AI that sits there and says, okay, is this a normal person? Is this what it looks like? Is this what it should look like? We can catch all of that. And if we are too endpoint focused in the traditional sense, we'll miss all of that, and we won't see it. And from what we can see, a lot of the attacks that we get involved with, we actually see it happen in that manner. They don't have to come inside. They don't have to give you a malware. They don't have to give you a virus, because they have your password. You didn't really get hacked. They just walked in and did what they wanted to and walked out.
So that's the ATO, the account takeover protection that you're referring to there.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And being able to scale that protection
Mhm.
into the cloud.
Because that scales infinitely. You don't care about how many endpoints there are. You just treat 365 itself as an endpoint and you self-protect it. And I'm picking on 365, but G Suite, Salesforce, what have you.
Yeah.
Shannon, what does the roadmap look like for SaaS apps that you're building these connectors for?
That's always a great question. Yes. So it looks really good. We should have some releases that I'll talk to James about offline coming soon. But where we kind of focus our efforts in terms of what we protect today and what we will protect is around things that are most predominantly used, right? In addition to the fact that what's their threat level. So a lot of folks, a lot of folks use Salesforce. We'll take Salesforce as an example. But the threat risk of something like Slack is actually higher than something like Salesforce. So when we start bringing on additional apps, we've considered that, right, in terms of our priorities. So you'll see us bring in some collaboration tools soon because everybody's jumping to Slack, they're jumping to Teams, we're communicating everywhere, which is great, but you have sensitive data in those locations, you're transferring files, they have to be protected. Those are additional vectors. So you'll see more collaboration apps coming in soon, as well as some additional file storage types.
Yeah, I love that. The collaboration piece is part of that. I love that. It's part of the offense because we've got to be able to, we've had this challenge. We want to bridge partners into teams. And, as a security company, that always makes my guys flip out a little bit. And it'd be nice to be able to be the department of yes. Oh yeah, we can do that.
Department of no.
Right. But that's just not me. That's James. That's every CIO, every security lieutenant to go fast. You want to have collaboration go as quickly as possible because usually at marketing wants to go fast. Sales wants to go fast, new product dev. And if you can facilitate that with a powerful security technology, that's a win. That's a big win for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, for sure.
Well, I appreciate both of you for jumping on the show today. This is the 100-Day Leadership Challenge, week 3. If you haven't noticed the Snoopy behind James, please say that you have, and you'll get your free 29-point endpoint thinking tool. Now, why is it a thinking tool? Because it's just that point. Like, how do you think and approach these problems? I think it's a big point of view. If you could download James' brain and Shannon's brain, my brain, how would we think and approach the problem? So you can slot solutions into the most cost-effective. So I appreciate both of you. Do you have any final comments? You don't have to comment, but do you have anything you wish I said that you wanted to say, you wish I prompted you for before we go?
I personally don't. I definitely appreciate, the conversation. It's always great to talk to you guys. Shola, I would love to connect with you on LinkedIn. I loved your comments. I think we have a lot in common. So, I'm super excited. I think one of the core takeaways I hope everybody takes from this conversation is it's not always about the tactical response. It's not always about the checklist. To your point, it's about thinking around what's going to protect me not only today, but tomorrow, and what's the right solution for that.
Thank you, Shannon. Final comment?
Final comment for me is one way we were seeing conversations twist is people look at CAS and cloud app security and think internally about themselves, but keep in mind all of your customers are now working from home in these insecure environments with who knows what going on. And so solutions like CAS are really good at helping protect you from them.
Like a mask?
Right? Like a mask, right? It's a good way to phrase it because in the past, I'm going to make fun of you now. In the past, we had...
I'm going to pull a mask, the Sonic Wall mask.
We had social distancing for our business, right? You would send over a thing, people would sign it and fax it back or what have you. Nowadays, people are just doing document share. thousands of percents more than they used to be. And you don't know what's in their
Yep.
house. You don't know what's going on. And so you might want to take that approach to it. So as a final thought is everything we've been talking about for the last few years is actually now more important. And it's kind of a little bit topsy-turvy in terms of what people should worry about. So for example, are we really worried about someone coming in and hacking through our firewall and taking control of our servers? Well, if we are, we really should be more worried about how things come in through the back door and how we're sharing with people and how that data comes in and out, because that's probably more likely. And I'd throw a stake in the ground and say, probably that's going to become more likely than email in terms of number one way people get compromised over time.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. Well, I appreciate, thank you, Mike, Keith, Shola for calling in, Shannon for jumping on this. I know you're working on several projects right now. I appreciate all the hard work you're doing in this technology.
Thanks. Thank you guys for inviting me. It was a blast.
And to all the listeners out there, have a great day. Have a great weekend. Thanks to my team. All right, everybody. Bye-bye.
Do you want to write down Shola's LinkedIn thing and send it to Shannon?
What did she do? I mean, what did he do? He sent something up
He
there?
commented and was asking her-
Someone needs to stop.
Oh, yeah, well,
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's all right.
Do you stop this?